want us to look, as I was talking to Jocelyn earlier, at the Bible. It's a pretty good book. We ought to read it every now and then, especially as it relates to this issue, because I think we will be surprised. Actually, I don't think we'll be surprised in this room, but in many circles of organized religion, which is oftentimes what I've come to refer to as the larger community that sometimes is referred to as the church. I don't believe it always authentically represents what the Bible calls Christianity. I think we'll see that the Bible has some very, very clear things to say about this issue that will hopefully shift some of the misconceptions that exist out there on this. So I simply want to take a few moments to talk about a biblical perspective on this issue of equality. So Galatians 3:28, and I'm battling my pride. I'm going to put these glasses on to find it. It helps if you can actually see the title of the book. Yeah. All right, then Galatians 3:28. The Bible says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." When we read the New Testament, and speaking from the perspective of the Pentecostal movement, and more specifically, I want to speak as from the heart of Christianity. When we read the New Testament, Jesus Christ is about empowering people. When Jesus called his disciples, he came from a mountain of prayer, and the very people that he looked for were not among the high-polished steeples of institutionalized religion and of the power hierarchies that were established in the systems of this world. He looked for the marginalized and the disenfranchised, and he drew them in. He had a wide range of representatives within his group. Jesus, in his movement, women were elevated to a place of prominence in his movement. There was a group of women that traveled with him, as was already mentioned, at the tomb of the resurrection. The first people there to give voice to the most defining moment in human history up to that point were women. Some would argue that the crucifixion was the most defining moment in human history, and as redemptive and as powerful as that was, without the resurrection, the crucifixion is nothing more than a humanitarian sacrifice. And so women were there to articulate it. The Bible is a very specific book. And take note of who's there, who does what, and what they say. There's a reason, and very important in the shift that was taking place in redemption history, that women would be there present at the tomb to articulate this defining moment in history, to give voice to it. And that whereas that point in human history, there was still a very significant struggle to find voice. And as thousands of years would still play out, still a struggle. But very important to note at that moment that it was God that chose women to articulate, to give voice to this defining moment. As we look at Acts chapter 2, which is a touchstone of Pentecostal theology and spirituality, it tells us in Acts chapter 2 that all of those that were present there that day, there were 120 believers gathered into an upper room of prayer, which begs the question, just as a side note, there were 500 visible witnesses of the post-resurrected life and ministry of Jesus Christ. According to Paul in 1 Corinthians, 500 eyewitnesses. It begs the question, where were the other 380? If there were only 120, and it says something about a convenience-driven mindset that I believe we still battle today. It's part of human nature. Human nature gravitates towards what is convenient, the path of least resistance. That's not always where God takes us, though. There are battles and adversity in life, and we find redemption. We find the power of God manifest in and through us when we encounter and engage adversity, and we go through those battles that he sets before us. In Acts chapter 2, it tells us, as Peter is quoting the prophet Joel, he said, in those days, in what days? In the last days. In those days, I will pour my Spirit out upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. It just did not say men and women. It even went to the point of validating in a society where children were just insignificant. Until you went through a rite of passage to be confirmed as a viable adult, you were utterly insignificant. And yet the Spirit of God, through the prophet Joel and through the Apostle Peter, says, I'll pour my Spirit out upon all flesh. And it begins with sons and daughters. At the perceived bottom of the ladder of the hierarchy of the world system. He said, I'll start there. And there's a powerful and profound statement about the direction that Jesus is taking the energy and the direction of his kingdom as it moves, as it begins to evolve and take shape. I'll pour my Spirit out upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. To prophesy is to even go beyond a notch above preaching. It is to give a definitive, articulate, and authoritative voice. Your sons and your daughters. In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm empowering and I'm entrusting the authority of my kingdom to the disenfranchised, to the marginalized, to those that the world would perceive to be powerless. I'm empowering. And how did that translate? Immediately as they leave the upper room, they're in the harvest. They're facing the masses of humanity, those that religion had alienated. Unless they had specifically adopted Jewish creeds and customs, dietary codes, and whatnot. There were 14 nationalities that were represented there that day from all over the civilized world that had adopted Jewish customs and ceremonies in order to have access to God. And one thing that I believe that we learn in Acts chapter 2 is that Jesus is wanting to make his kingdom accessible to all people. That you don't have to adopt a culture, you don't have to adopt a ceremony, you just have to receive him. And it's a powerful, profound statement about, here's what we're about to get into, is about walls being torn down. It's always been amazing to me, and I've come to the point in my life and my journey in ministry where if it doesn't sound like redemption, if it doesn't look like redemption, if it doesn't talk like redemption, then honey, it ain't redemption. And it's amazing to me the one specific ministry that Paul said every believer has. He said we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. And it's been interesting to me to observe through the years how much of what is called ministry is driven by the energy of alienation rather than reconciliation. And that's what we've been empowered. The one ministry that all believers have been given, the ministry of reconciliation. We've been given the ministry of intercessory prayer, which is to what? Intercede on the behalf of people, to stand in the gap, and to also win lost souls, to minister to the weak, the weary, and the wounded. 3 ministries that we all have, and very specific to understand, or very important to understand what those 3 ministries are. And if one is specifically mentioned as the ministry of reconciliation, then it ought to manifest through our life. It ought to be what our energy goes into. More than dividing, we ought to be reconciling. And what drives the systems of this world is categorizing people, building up walls that divide, that alienate. That's what the systems of the world are built upon. Mark 16 and Matthew 28, Jesus also briefly mentions the empowerment of people. Mark 16 is one of those texts that people like to avoid. Everybody wants to use Matthew 28. Nobody likes to use Mark 16. But there's some very powerful stuff in Mark 16 that we need to pay attention to. In Mark 16, Jesus said, "These signs shall follow them that believe." Not them that are ordained, not them that are credentialed, not them that are validated by the systems of man, but them that believe. That's the only qualification, to believe. And prefaced by that, he gives them this command: go and preach. You know, I wonder, how in God's name are we missing this kind of stuff? It's right there. This is not, and listen, you know, Bible's Bible. Paul says it, that's good. But listen, Jesus is saying this: go and preach. That is a command that is given in the imperative tense. It's not, hey, this is a really good idea. He's saying, all right, I'm about to tell you something. I'm closing the chapter on my earthly ministry. I will leave you. This is what I want you to understand. This is what I want you to do. Go and preach. The word preach comes from the Greek word kradzo, which literally means to reach within the depth of your soul and your being and to elevate a cry that is definitive, that is non-negotiable, that just delivers a clarion call. And that's what Jesus said: go and deliver that kind of message, preach. And in that text, there is absolutely no hint of gender being a basis for qualification. It is only belief, only faith in a living God. Go and preach the gospel. These signs shall follow. And we're not going to get into that today. Just explore that on your own. That's not the topic today, but it says that in my name they shall cast out devils. In my name they shall speak in new tongues. In my name they shall lay their hands on the sick. They shall recover. They shall, if they pick up any serpent, it shall not harm them, or drink any deadly thing, it shall not harm them. Ain't got time to unpack that today, but it's a good read. Study it. Matthew 28, Jesus also gave another perspective. He said to teach. Go and teach. You need both. And again, gender is not a qualification here. To teach is to offer instruction, and it comes from the idea of communicating truths and to communicating doctrine. So you have both of that. You have a passionate, persuasive response, but also the communicating of doctrine. Jesus puts both of those together in these final words that he gives in his earthly ministry to command his church, his disciples, male and female, to walk in this ministry. This is what I'm giving you. This is what I want you to do. So clearly there, Jesus qualified everybody that was his disciple to preach and to teach. Again, that's in the Bible. Pretty good book. Read it every now and then.